North Dakota State University and is the director of the North Dakota State University Plant Improvement Program. He earned his Ph.D. at Southern Illinois University. Go Salukis! He has the North Dakota University Woody Plant Improvement Program focuses on the development of new woody plant cultivars suited for USDA hardiness zones 3 and 4. His research focused on plant hardiness and disease and pest resistance. The program at NDSU has introduced 2 conifers to the trade, one in 2022, which was Highland Guard Mountain Pine, and in 2019, Highland Splendor Mugo Pine. A few of his favorite things are spending time with his family, traveling, wandering around arboretums, I get it, and classic cars. So I'd like to introduce Dr. West.
Yes, it is. All right, so thank you for having me. My name is Todd West. Just to kind of put things into a little perspective, one is I hate having a hand mic, so I feel like I'm at a karaoke bar. So please bear with me if I break into song. It's just with what will happen. But this talk was originally kind of invited to be at the Conifer College, and then what happened, COVID happened. And then kind of everything fell apart. So I don't know how this turned into being a keynote speaker, so I apologize right now. All right, so we're gonna talk about a topic that I don't want to talk about, winter. Who wants to talk about winter? No, oh, a couple, okay, all right, we got a couple people then. Because being in North Dakota, I'm not a North Dakota native. I don't think anybody is from North Dakota. And we have what's called winter amnesia. And I think that's with a lot of places. But the winters are not very enjoyable in North Dakota. And so the only reason people live in North Dakota is because we forget that there is a winter. The summers are beautiful, and so we're able to enjoy them. And then as soon as the crops start coming off from the fields, we all go, oh crap, it's coming. And so, but I'm very fortunate to be in North Dakota to be able to do what I do. Those of you that have heard of the North Dakota program may have interacted with Dr. Dale Herman. And so I took over his position 14 years ago. And I'm very lucky to have, because the position that I have, we are a dying breed. In academia, having woody plant improvement is really not happening and less and less. I had a student that just contacted me not too long ago who said, Dr. West, I'd really like to do a Ph.D. under you. And I said, well, there's other programs, and because he's coming from the South. I'm like, why would you come to North Dakota? He goes, well, Tom Randy is not taking students anymore at NC State. He's retiring. Mark Brand, University of Connecticut, all the barberry work and et cetera, he's retiring. Stan Hokinson at University of Minnesota is retiring. Ryan Contreras out in the Northwest is going to administrative. We're losing all the woody plant academics, which is really scary. So let's start talking about winter. I don't want to talk about winter. But anyway, so this is what we have. We have already heard comments about how this plant is hardy zone 4, right? We know that the hardiness map has been updated, and it's utilizing, so the USDA was able to use more data points and to be able to get a better accurate depiction of what our climate is here in the US. Now, do plants listen to this? No, right? I'm kind of preaching to the choir. That's the other concern I have is like, why do they want to hear me talk about winter hardiness? When pretty much everybody in here knows about it, right? We all know how it works. But this was updated in 2023. I was actually very fortunate. I was part of the group that helped update this map with a lot of different input. But we know there are some problems, and really what it comes down to is, what is this actual zone? when you say it's zone 5, when you say a zone plant is zone 6, what does that actually mean? And it's all based on winter low temperatures, what it can survive, right? But we know that's just one factor. It's a very small factor of will the plant survive. But this is kind of our foundation that we're going to be working with. Before I get too far though too, I also want to mention where I'm located. Because North Dakota is the last state in the nation that people visit. More people go to Hawaii and Alaska than North Dakota. Not a surprise. So if you don't know where it is, there it is. That's where North Dakota is. We are a prairie state, which is kind of ironic. So I'm here talking about trees from a state that is prairie. So North Dakota, come for the, oh, never mind. There's nothing here. So I just want to give a little background of who I am and what I have to do. Here's our state tree. And some of you are from the Midwest. Obviously, we're here in the Quad Cities, so we're kind of flat here. So I think we can all maybe relate a little bit. But when they hear, oh, you're from Fargo. Oh, I saw that movie. Great, good for you. It's not even filmed in Fargo. But anyway, but if you ever do come to Fargo, one is look me up, because I would love to show you around. 2, I'll take you to our tourist building, whatever it is, the tourism building, because you can actually go in and touch the original chipper from the movie. That's all we're known for. There's nothing else in Fargo. We have a saying that, hey, I was in Fargo for a day once. It was the longest week of my life. But Fargo is actually a great bustling community, and in North Dakota, about 90% of the trees have been touched by human hands. So North Dakotans love trees because, again, we're a prairie state. So it's very important for our tree research. So we're at the 47-degree northern latitude. And so when I was invited to talk about winter hardiness, obviously it's something that I definitely deal with because we are evaluating plants for zone 3 and 4. Just to give you a little idea here, if you know where Fargo is located right on the Red River. So if you just go below that, I'm horrible with pointers, I'm not going to point. But right below that 47-degree northern latitude, on the far east side is Fargo. And that is where the university is, so that's our home base. But unfortunately, we're in what's called the Red River Valley. The Red River Valley is an ancient glaciated lake, Lake Agassiz. And it was bigger than all the Great Lakes combined. So topsoil in Fargo is 100 feet deep. So it does not represent, the rest of the world. Very prolific with agriculture production. So the Red River Valley is known for crop production. But the rest of the state is very different. So we actually have an arboretum that we developed, and that is out what's called Absaraka. So if you just go a little bit west and north of Fargo, you'll see a little dot that says Absaraka. That's where most of our work is conducted. The rest of the dots on here, so one of my favorites is what's called Langdon. I'm going to try to, so Langdon's right there. And it's 30 minutes from the Canadian border. And the reason I go there is because Fargo's not cold enough. So I'm one of the few people, I think, in the United States who wishes for a true -30 winter. Because if we don't hit -30, it doesn't screen my plant material. And I get really upset. And we're not talking wind chill. Wind chill, we know plants don't feel wind chill. So we need real temp. And unfortunately, this winter, we didn't get very cold. We only got down to -28. And it was a very mild winter. Yeah, it was very sad. Very sad. The other dots are just across the state where we do our plant trials, again, because we are a land-grant university and we have to then do research for the people. But if you do come to North Dakota, again, the last state that you'll ever visit. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But as we know with our hardiness zones, plants don't always, well, not only do plants not know the hardiness zones, but we know that they're not set in stone. So 2023, we had the update, but prior to that update, we had the cold winter of 2018 to 2019. So in late January 2019, we got down to, even in parts of North Dakota, to zone 2. And so all those plants that are hardy zone 4 suffered. We had a lot of dying plants, a lot of dieback, a lot of issues because everybody was planting 4B. They were starting to plant into some of the 5 material, and they were just going stupid. So we really need to make sure that we're planting appropriately. One thing I look at, so I do run our woody plant improvement program. And so with our program, we have released over 60 cultivars to the trade. Some conifers, some deciduous. And 2 are ones that I released, that was what's mentioned in the intro, but then we have 2 others that we'll show later as well. And I know you're like, why? We're not even talking about cold yet. We're getting there. But Prairie Statesman Swiss Stone Pine came out of NDSU, if you're familiar with that one. And we will mention it because you can buy it here. It's as in the plant auction. But then also Royal Splendor Spruce, and we'll talk about that one as well. Those 2 were selected by my predecessor. But we have over 60 plants that we've introduced to the trade, and we still have active 40 trademarks. And that's really important because that shows that those plants are being sold or utilized in the trade, which is really exciting. For the Köppen-Geiger plant climate classification, this is really important again to match up plant material for your climate. Most people never talk about this, but it's something as a researcher we look at because this is the type of plant material that I'm on the screen. I look across the world for plants that match my climate. And so we are a DFB. It says warm summer, humid continental climate, coldest month averaging below 0, all months with average temperature below 22 degrees Celsius, and at least 4 months averaging above 10 degrees Celsius. No significant precip difference between seasons, and so that's what we match up with. So here's my arboretum, and we've evaluated over 200 different genera, over 3,000 different species, and over 15,000 accessions since 1974. Most of these are dead, because that's what I do. My job is to kill plants. So you're like, wow, that must be an amazing place to visit. All these different genera, all these different species. And yes, I will say yes, it's a great place to visit. I would love to host you all. Please come. But you're not going to see all these plants, because a lot of them are dead. Because we really are trying to push that zone 5 up and to be able to evaluate. But we have the largest woody plant collection in all of North Dakota, so ooh, right? We only rival the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, but we don't do weddings. Because we are one of the few research arboreta in the nation. It's a very unique situation. It's 100% research. We don't have Chihuly glass. We don't have lights and fountains. We have research, and that's it. So it's a really exciting place. It's about 80 acres is the farm. So if you ever Google map North Dakota, which why wouldn't you, but if you ever do, this is what you'll see. And so 90% of the land mass in North Dakota is under agriculture production. And so here you can see all the quarter sections. So it's very easy to get around in North Dakota as long as you know how to drive in a square. But Fargo there is the metropolis located right here. And if you Google then Absaraka, you would zoom in then on this little island. And this is what I call my paradise island. Because we're surrounded by agriculture, and then here we have this little arboretum. And so this is now turned on its side. We have 45 acres of an arboretum proper that's planted alphabetically by genera, because of course we all plant our plants alphabetically. And for long-term evaluation. All these other areas that then comprise about 60 of the 80 acres is in woody plant improvement. And it's in long-term trials, again, starting back in 1974. So if you come into the Arboretum, this is what you'd be greeted to. We have display gardens. We've got, again, long-term trials. We have short-term trials. A lot of things going on. Very few people get to see it in the wintertime. I'm a big fan of Taylor juniper. Beautiful plant. Well, there it is, a nice lone spike there in our winter juniper collection. For germplasm sources, what we do is we do collaborate with a lot of different people. And we also collect material from all over the US. We collect foreign and domestic seed source. I'm actually doing plant breeding. Dr. Herman was not able to do that because we know how long juvenility periods can be with plants, with woody plants. So now I'm basically taking his material and being able to take it to the next step. So we're doing a lot of hybridizing. One mention was with the Isley collection, with the crossing of Japanese and Korean. That's one thing we're doing as well, because the Isley collection, the Jack Frost series, are not hardy in our zone 4. And it may be hardy in your zone 4, but your zone 4 is different from my zone 4. So that's what we're going to talk about here in just a minute, is why are there differences in zone 4? Why are there differences in zone 5? And there are a lot of differences. That's why, like, if you look at the Durr manual, Mike Durr says, this is hardy zone 4. I'm like, you're a liar. Because it's not. I'm like, Mike, stay in Georgia. You know Georgia, that's it. Right? And I said, no, it's not. But he'll say, well, but it's hardy in Orano, Maine. Orano, Maine is not Fargo, North Dakota, by any means. Very different climate, very different environmental conditions. We also do a lot of in vitro work with dealing with somoclonal variation. Also, we're heading into, now this is not really with conifers, but looking at sterility with plants. Because that's a big one now, is with the invasive police. How long does it take to release a tree? Again, not really part of the main topic here, but it's important to understand why woody plant improvement is so important and why we're looking at then the cold hardiness trials, because it's all about long term. And so I've got a few trees here that we're going to talk about specifically, then get into cold hardiness. But we know that you introduce a tree, and you're like, oh, when can I get it? Like 10 years. That's a good scenario. We evaluate our material for a minimum to 20 to 30 years, then we release it. Then it takes another 10 years for a nursery to be able to build up stock, to be able to see, can we calibrate? Are we going to put it in a can? Is it going to bear root? Is it going to go just ball and burlap? How's it going to work? What, do we dig it in the spring? Do we dig it in the fall? You have to go through all those scenarios. And it takes them usually a decade. So that's what I love, where Isley just put out these new spec sheets. And it's so true, priceless with time, right? And I'm definitely speaking to the choir here when we talk about conifers priceless with time. Because that's what it's all about. So I love this diagram that they put out. So this is available on their website. But it shows Picea glauca pendula of what it looks like at a 1 year and then 20 years later in the landscape. And we know it definitely takes time. All right, so I just want to talk about a couple of our conifer selections, and then we're going to dive right into why I'm here. And all of these, well, all but one, I was able to get donated from Isley and from Oregon Pride to be able to put into the plant auction. So this is one, Royal Splendor Norway Spruce. And so it was released as an ABs, but I'm 100% sure that it is not. And it has one of the highest levels of needle cast resistance, which you get a little bit of that from the Norway anyway, that you'd expect compared to Colorado. But when you read the description of what Norway should be, this is not a Norway. And it's a beautiful plant. It doesn't get any of the pendulous tertiary branching. The needles are much shorter than what you typically have of Norway. So it looks a little better kept from both of those reasons. The cones are half the size of what Norway should be. So when my predecessor, Dr. Herman, yes, it's right here. Thank you, Jeff. Boy, now I feel like a salesman. All right, I got the microphone. What do we hear? And I hear 10, right? So beautiful plant. But what I found is that our seed source is from Finland. And what the seed source where it came from is where Abies and Siberica meet. So it's 100% ex-Venica. It's Finnish spruce. And I'm wondering, and I've never done any, it's really hard to do needle cast trials because you have to have the needle cast disease there, and you have to plant all the trees, so it's really hard. You can't inoculate needle cast. And what we're finding though is that it has high resistance to needle cast, some of the highest we've seen out of any species. And I wonder if that's coming from the ovovada. That's the only thing it really could be, is that we're getting that high resistance. So beautiful plant, but I am positive that it's a hybrid. Then Prairie Statesman. Prairie Statesman was a conifer of the year, one of the conifers of the year from the ACS back in 2015. I always tell people, it doesn't matter what Swiss stone pine you have, just make sure you have one, because they're gorgeous. Here's just a picture from 2008 out at the Arboretum. There's Dr. Herman, the backside of Dr. Herman. So if you've never seen him, now you've seen the backside. And so he's pointing at Prairie Statesman. Now this was his favorite plant. He named it after himself. The cultivar's Herman. But then here it is in 2024, just absolutely beautiful. It looks kind of weird on the bottom left, and that's because we had deer get into the Arboretum one winter, and they just completely raked the bottom of it. But it came completely back. It's beautiful. Now this is one that I released, is Highland Splendor Mugo Pine. So if you're familiar with Tannenbaum Mugo, that actually, the original material was collected by Dr. Herman, my predecessor, when he was at South Dakota State. And then he moved to North Dakota State, and all that material was left behind. So SDSU released Tannenbaum, not NDSU. And that really has kind of bothered Dale all these years. But at that site that I was showing you earlier, Langdon, that's 30 minutes from the Canadian border, we found another Mugo selection from the same collection trip that he made to Europe. But this one had kind of a bluish tint to it. And we sent it out to Oregon. Oregon found that, and you can see the color comparison. I don't know if you can really see it on these slides here, but on this left-hand picture, we have standard Mugo on the left, Highland Splendor on the right. It's a much darker green. And Oregon Pride was evaluating this plant, and they found that it doesn't yellow in the winter. Out in Oregon, Mugo's yellow. And for them, this does not discolor at all. It stays perfectly green throughout the entire year. And they were really excited about it. It also grows 20% faster than Tannenbaum, which, for normal people, it'd be like, who cares, right? But for a Mugo, it's like, yes, 20% more, I'll take it. So that was really exciting. So we released it then as Highland Splendor, and hopefully it will be the Tannenbaum replacement. Then we figured we needed a bigger one. Everybody's, you can't have just a 15-foot tree. We want a 30-foot tree. And so here we have the subspecies Uncinata. Now it depends on, are you a lumper or a splitter? Who's a lumper? All right, who's a splitter? All right, only a couple hands went up. Okay, so the rest of you have no idea what I'm talking about. So is it a subspecies or is it a separate species? Depends who you talk to, right? But it's a mountain pine, but essentially is a Mugo kind of form. Typical Uncinata is what you see on the right, and you can see me as scale, so I'm 6'1", so I use myself as a scale all the time. And then here on the left is the selection of Highland Guard. Now, unfortunately, Oregon Pride did not send me any of those for this auction, so you're out of luck. It was mentioned the idea of the companion plants of conifers. So I brought a companion plant with as well that's in the auction right here. This is my favorite plant. I did not name it after myself, but this is directly from Korea. It was selected, or original seed source was from the National Arboretum. They went with Longwood Garden to Korea back in the 60s and collected seed of Vechla costata, Korean birch. and sent out then material after they grew the seedlings out, sent them out to different arboreta. We received it later as a second generation, and we had a row of them, and only one was dwarf, but it has this beautiful peely bark. We can't do Little King River Birch, so it's a premise with our arboretum, our soil type, our pH is about 7.8 to 8.2. So everything we do, we screen for pH tolerance. So this is in the same clade as river birch, so we don't have any the bronze birch borer issue because it's pretty much resistant. And then also with this one, we don't see any of the pH issues that you typically see with river birch, so it's completely tolerant of high pH. Beautiful little plant. Again, scale-wise, there's costata on the left as a species, should be about 30 foot tall. This one tops out at 9. So beautiful plant. And available at Isley. So they do cuttings. All right, so that was a way too long of an introduction. I apologize. But I wanted you to at least get a little bit of feel of who I am and what I do and how unique of what we do at North Dakota State University. So what is cold hardiness? So now we're getting into talking about things we don't really want to talk about. But it's just the ability for the plant to survive winter, right? And there's a lot of different factors. It's a very complex adaptive trait. I wish we had like a single gene that we could turn on, turn off, or enhance. But we don't have that. It's very complex. There's a lot of factors that go into cold hardiness. It's also a dynamic process. So it's not something that just turns on, turns off. We have to deal with acclimation, so the seasonal change to get the plant to actually go into dormancy, and then obviously in the spring to come out of dormancy. So there's a lot of factors that go into both of those stages. That's why when we look at the winter hardiness, USDA hardiness zone map, doesn't take into account of how the tree went to sleep and how that tree is waking up. So that's a big issue. So our key phases that we go through, cold acclimation, fall to winter, midwinter hardiness, what's actually happening in our winter. And I know obviously not all of you are from this exact region, but I think some of you are. And I think it's happening across the US as well, but we're having it too. It wasn't this winter, but last winter, my son and I, we took our motorcycles out in Fargo in January. What the heck? You know, that shouldn't happen. We had 60 degrees in January, and we were out riding our motorcycles because we had no snow, we had nothing. And it was wonderful, but it was dumb. And I knew it was gonna hurt a lot of our trees, which it did, because we had that wake up. And that's what we're seeing a lot of. And then we have the de-acclimation going from winter to spring. And so here we are, we're back at this hardiness zone map. So we know this is just a snapshot. This is one part of the plan of dealing with cold hardiness. And as I mentioned, the state of North Dakota didn't follow this new map, because back in 2019, we hit a zone 3 for almost the whole entire state. So some main factors that are involved. So let's create a list of what's involved with cold tolerance. First is genetic adaptation. We know genetics plays a major role. I think that's, with all of us. My wife's sister, our families, myself and my wife's family are primarily from Wisconsin. And so, we're cheeseheads. And she moved to Mesa, Arizona, and then adapted to that climate. I went down the first time to visit them years and years ago when their kids were little in July. And I was gonna be the cool uncle, and they were all playing on the trampoline. I ran out to the trampoline with them, started jumping around, and I thought I was gonna have a heat stroke. Because I'm not adapted to that scenario. But they were wearing long jeans and long sleeve shirts, and I was like, how are you doing this? We're still humans, genetics, right? Partly, but adaptation. So here, so we have Engelmann spruce. The native range is huge. But it also is primarily based on elevation. So we have a lot of elevation changes throughout that native range. But we do have, highland scenarios, lowland scenarios of different within the species. Acclimation and deacclimation is a big factor. Again, how does it go to sleep? How does it wake up? Probably a bigger factor than the cold winter temp is how does it actually go into dormancy? Photoperiod and temperature cues. We know that photoperiods happen. The day length gets shorter in the fall. We're going to have colder temps. And then we're going to have that, shorter days during the winter. And then come spring, we get the reverse. We get these longer days. We got what's Saturday, June 21st. It's the summer equinox, right? So we actually are finally into summer. Cellular and biochemical changes. There are a lot of things that happen at the cellular level. So the plants can, change their osmotic potentials, the ability for water going in and out of the cells, and then looking at those intercellular spaces so we don't get the crystals, the ice crystals to form. So there's all these things that are happening at the cellular level as well for cold tolerance. Then we have morphological traits. So plants have different structures. Some have longer, thinner needles. Some have shorter, thicker needles. Some have thicker cuticles. Different shapes of the buds. There's all these factors that the plants then develop with these different traits to be able to withstand cold temperatures. Soil moisture and nutrition. Plants that are going into this acclimation phase going into winter, we know that they need water. Because we know during dormancy we can have issues, and we'll talk more about that. But nutrition is also an important thing. Having proper fertilizer, and it's not just general fertilizer, there's very specific nutrients that the plant really needs to be able to go into that dormancy and do well. Age and developmental stage, or state. We know that mature trees can handle some of the cold better than a young tree, just by their physical age and their developmental stage. And then cultural practices, things that we do can either hurt or benefit the plant, especially like with pruning. We want to have our pruning timing done correctly. So genetic variation and adaptation. Cold tolerance varies by species, by ecotype, and by provenance. Example, northern versus southern seed sources. So again, looking at those native ranges. We don't ever plant anything that comes from the south, even though you have those large ranges, because we know it's not going to handle our situation. Selection and breeding for improved hardiness. Looking at plants that are showing to be genetically superior to be able to handle that. We struggle with fir. Fir is really hard for us to survive. It's really sad when you can't even grow a concolor fir. It's like, why not? They just don't like our cold. They don't like our dry. But Siberian fir, see, that's the part I still get upset. It's like, here I've got, a Fenica spruce that is half Siberian spruce. So I've got a theme going, right? And I can do really well with Siberian fir. I live in the wrong place. Everything's Siberian. It's like, yikes. But genetics plays a major role. So we have the genetic differences within the species and ecotypes and within provenance, but then also epigenetics plays a major role with cold tolerance. And that's the ability for the physical genes that are present in the plant to be altered very quickly. So with species and provenance, again, going back to this idea that native range. So here's the native range of lodgepole pine, huge native range, all the way from Alaska, all the way to California. So where are you getting your seed source from is really important. Because there's going to be some that are growing at high altitudes, some that will be at lower altitudes. So for whenever we're looking for seed source, we're always trying to find that highest altitude, the highest native range to get that coldest material so that we can look at the adaptation for freezing conditions. Genetic variability. Some species are more naturally adapted to cold hardy. Natural selection. Plants in colder regions face stronger selective pressure. So then over time, individuals with genes, we know that they adapt. So plants that can withstand the changing environment will survive, survival of the fittest, right? And that's what we're looking for, is the survival of the fittest. Mutations happen all the time in plants. So we can actually have some mutations and look at that, but they're really not extremely common when it comes to cold hardiness, because they're either going to kind of make it or not. So it's more of that natural selection. But the epigenetics, it is less common, but it's very relevant dealing with cold hardiness. So environmental stress sometimes causes heritable changes. And so I have a very crude picture there on the right, but we have some different things going on. One is DNA methylation. So we're actually getting methyl groups being able to attack, or not attack, but attach to the DNA, which changes then some of the outcomes. Histone modifications, where we get DNA that will actually combined up tighter. And then we have what's called mRNAs. Now, you've all experienced mRNAs if you did the vaccine for COVID. And so we get these small RNA pieces that can then have impacts on our cold hardiness as well. So DNA methylation, what that means is just a methyl group that attaches to the DNA, usually at the cysteine bases. And what it does is that it can turn genes off. So it can silence the genes just by having that methyl group come in. And so there's a quick change that can happen with that methylation. And so with cold tolerance, genes that suppress cold response proteins might get methylated, turned off in cold condition, allowing stress response genes to be active. So again, that's the plant adaptation that can happen very quickly. With histone modifications, histones are proteins that DNA wrap around, and so modifying these can loosen or tighten the DNA packing. So DNA can stretch out, it can clump together, and it does this with histones. And so looser packaging, more gene expression. So if our DNA is loose and open, it's easier for all of the enzymes to work to get the expression to happen at the genetic level. If they're all tight together, you can't. They don't do all the expression as easily. So cold tolerance role, cold conditions can change histone modifications, activating these stress-related genes, like antifreeze proteins. Or protective enzymes, so we're not getting then the cells freezing. We're not getting those intercellular crystals forming that will then rupture the cells. The small RNAs, so I mentioned like the idea of like with the COVID vaccine, but then we have these small RNAs and they block the translation of specific mRNAs or even cause their degradation. So in cold environments, small RNAs may be upregulated to fine-tune the response of genes involved in metabolism and protection of those cells. We're dealing again at the cellular level. So why does this matter? So a pine seedling exposed to cold winters may epigenetically activate cold shock proteins. And if these epigenetic marks persist in reproductive cells, its offspring may inherit some of these increased cold tolerance, even if no DNA sequence has changed. So they can have this inheritability component with this epigenetic change as well. So it's a quick change that can be inherited as well. Acclimation and deacclimation. So again, this is where I think, is where most of the importance happens, is how does the plant go to sleep? How does it wake up? And so with cold acclimation, we're looking at a gradual physiological process triggered by decreasing temperatures, photoperiod decreasing in the fall, which then starts to increase the cold tolerance through a whole series of events. And the deacclimation is obviously the reverse of that. So way too much to look at, but we have this, the changes of the season. Fall, we have where acclimation begins, winter, we're hopefully at our peak cold hardiness, because then that's when that cold hardiness map comes in. But what's happening in the fall, the cues, we're getting shorter days, we're getting cooler temps. That's telling the plant, you gotta get ready. Things are gonna go bad if you're not gonna be ready. So they have those nice cues, not like me where I get caught off guard every winter or every fall. Oh crap, winter's coming. Oh, I did not prepare. But here the plants do get that. So they get that onset of cold acclimation. Cells lose water to reduce ice formation, accumulations of sugars within the cells to be able to withstand that. Production of antifreeze proteins will be then found at the cellular level as well. Obviously the tree is going to slow down its growth and it's going into that dormancy phase. In the winter, we have that maximum cold hardiness, membrane lipids are stabilized, and which is really important because we don't want to have the membranes of the cell to break, so they have to be stabilized. Metabolism is minimal. We're not seeing active growth during cold hardiness. If you're in that zone 9, awesome, congratulations, that's great. But for the rest of us that are not, we need our plant to basically stop. But what happens though is the risk factors is severe cold events. So we're seeing these, the polar issues, the polar vortexes that are coming down. And that's why I laugh when people talk about it's like climate change. And we're not going to have a debate tonight, but we know the climate is changing. We're having these very severe fluctuations. And people are like, oh, well, Kansas is going to be Texas in 20 years. In the summer, yes. In the winter, no. And I'm all for it. If North Dakota's going to become Kansas, sign me up. But the problem that we're seeing is like back in 2019. Yes, Fargo, we got up to 105 for a week 2 summers ago. Wonderful, that was great. Welcome Texas, awesome. But then we got down to minus 40 in the winter. So that is not a zone 5. That's a zone 3. And we're still going to experience that because of these extreme temperature fluctuations. So we need plants that are going to be adapted for that. So we can't just push a zone 5 into a zone 3. In the summer, obviously we have active growth, we have photosynthesis, everything's happening, but what's happening to the tree then as we go through summer is that they're going to be starting to store carbohydrates, they're going to be starting to store those nutrients, and that's why it's so important for the plant to have that active growth, because if we end up in drought is a big killer, we know that. Not only for the plant during the growing season because of lack of water, but it's also not able to prepare for winter because they're not making the carbohydrates that they should. They're not having all the storage that's going to be happening. Getting all those nutrients that it needs, and then that's what we wonder. Then okay, the next season when the plant comes out, it may not come back, and we saw a lot of that this year in Fargo. We saw a lot of trees that just full mature trees dead. We had severe drought last year, and they weren't able to prepare for winter. They just didn't have the nutrients. They didn't have the stored carbohydrates. So basically they died. Then we jump to spring. We have that deacclimation. So everything's going now into reverse. Increasing temperatures, longer days, gradual loss of cold hardiness. And that's what we hope is that gradual, not these big fluctuations where you get a couple weeks of 70 degrees in February, and then you do a nosedive in temperature. Obviously plants don't like that. But we're going to have obviously then the bud swelling, the elongation, but the biggest vulnerability, as we just mentioned, late frost and early deacclimation. And that's where we're having the problems with the whole idea of this climate fluctuations. And so that's where the plants are really suffering with what's happening in the fall and then what's happening in that spring. So late spring frost injury occurs after premature deacclimation when tender new growth is damaged. This can be quite detrimental, but sometimes it's just superficial. The plant will recover from that. We all get worried when our buds are browning and dying, but plants have those secondary buds. They kind of can plan for that, but we're going to see that blackened or curled new growth, or even potentially slow growth. Likely to have a growth reduction, but hopefully they'll make a comeback. Photoperiod and temperature cues, short day lengths, trigger changes as dormancy is increased, that's the endodormancy. Low non-freezing temperatures help initiate and deepen acclimation. We want to have this eco-dormancy. So after endodormancy, obtaining those chilling acclimation requirement. We talk about chilling hours. You hear about a lot of chilling hours in fruit production. You know, you have an apple tree, you need to have so many chilling hours for it to be able to produce fruit. Well, regular plants need chilling hours too, and especially if they're going to be going through dormancy. So dormancy is influenced by external factors like temperatures. Exposing to chilling temperatures can trigger this transition. We talked already about cellular biochemical changes, you know, and these are the three main ones that we need to keep in mind. Dehydration of cells, accumulation of solutes, so sugars in the cells, also amino acids and proteins, because they act as cryoprotectants. So antifreeze, you know, you put antifreeze in your car, cells and plants need antifreeze too. And so they have to produce their own. You know, it'd be wonderful if we could just do a drench of antifreeze around our trees and they'd be fine. Don't suggest that. But they have the ability to do it themselves. Again, having the proper time and the ability. Membrane stabilization, we already mentioned that, is that the lipid composition of the membranes need to be stable and so that prevent damage from freezing. I mentioned the morphological traits early, you know, having more compact buds, thick, waxy cuticles in the needles. You know, there's a lot of different morphological changes the plants can go through to be able to withstand that cold temperature. You know, it's great to see all the dwarf conifers in here because they obviously have an advantage over some of the bigger species, plus or minus, again, depending on the establishment as well, put them into the landscape. But generally, lower compact forms, which you'll find in high elevations or latitudes, reduce exposure to harsher conditions. Just have a picture of Sester's dwarf. I mean, obviously much smaller than standard species. But they can have a tendency to be able to withstand these colder temps a little bit better. Also snow line, you know, if you have snow, obviously snow is a great insulator. Soil moisture and nutrition. Again, this is one of the biggest issues, right, is drought stress prior to that acclimatization, is making sure that the plants have enough water. Because once you get into winter and you're in a freezing condition, basically your tree is now in a desert. It has no way to take up water. And here we're dealing with needle, evergreen type of plants. And they have a tendency then to obviously transpire, especially if we get warmer temperatures. And that's where we get all that needle burn. Because they're losing water, but they're not uptaking water. And if the tree is already stressed by not having the proper water content or water amount going into winter, they're already at a disadvantage. They also don't have all those stored proteins and stored carbohydrates and everything happening. So balanced nutrition also. So nutrition is important too. And again, in order to be able to have those stored components within the cells. But especially potassium. Potassium is the biggest one we need to think about in the fall. That is so important because that supports proper physiological function. So how does potassium improve cold tolerance? Three main ways: osmoregulation and cell water balance, enzyme activation, and membrane stability. So osmoregulation and cell water balance, potassium helps maintain osmotic potential. So to be able to move water, that's so important. Allowing them to retain water under cold and dehydrating conditions. So again, we're not getting then hopefully the burn because there's water present. So this also reduces the risk of intercellular ice formation, being able to move that water, which can rupture cell membranes. So that's important too. So we need to have these solutes, but we also need to be able to move water out of different locations. Enzyme activation. Many enzymes involved in cold acclimation, like those synthesizing protective sugar proteins, require potassium to function efficiently. So these enzymes support the buildup of those cryoprotectants. So having the potassium is essential for those to happen. Membrane stability, we talked about that. We have to have the membranes to be stable so that they don't break and cause cell damage. And so potassium contributes to membrane polarization and ion balance. And so that's extremely important. It helps stabilize those membranes, especially during freeze-thaw cycles, which happens a lot, especially when we get those warm-ups and then freezes, warm-ups, freezes. So proper potassium levels reduce membrane leakage and damage when temperatures fluctuate. Two other things that potassium is involved in. One is the energy management and photosynthesis. So potassium regulates stomatal opening and closing. So when we don't have enough potassium, the plant's going to suffer. And so making sure that we have a balanced nutrition with potassium. It also supports ATP production, so the energy of the plant is critical for maintaining cell functions during stress, because if the plant doesn't have the energy, it's not going to be able to handle the situation. It's not going to be able to handle what it needs to do to be able to transport water, to be able to get the nutrients, to be able to do the stored carbohydrates, etc. Also, an antioxidant defense. Cold stress increases the production of reactive oxygen species. And we hear about this all the time with our bodies. That's why you're supposed to eat blueberries and having all those antioxidants. But potassium boosts the activity of antioxidant enzymes like superoxide dismutase and catalase, helping cells mitigate oxidative damage. What happens with potassium deficiency? We have a reduce in cold hardiness. We see increased cell leakage in tissue after frost. And we have poor carbohydrate storage and weakening winter survival, just simply by not having enough potassium. So we want to deal with having an amount of water, but we also need to have the correct amount of potassium as well. Age and developmental stage, young trees or seedlings are generally more vulnerable. Obviously with mature trees, they have thicker bark, so they're able to withstand a lot of those fluctuations. We don't wrap mature trees that have thick bark to protect them from the winter sun, right? We wrap the young trees because they have that thin bark. They don't have the ability to physically protect themselves, to have that insulation. Also, larger trees have more developed root system. So they're able to get to more water, they're able to have more storage, and there's a lot more things that they can do to resist that cold damage as they mature. Also, energy reserves. Obviously, with a bigger tree, they have the ability to store more. But that doesn't always save them from winter death. I mentioned cultural practices, pruning being one of the issues, but proper plant selection obviously is number one. Fertilization, which we mentioned, so that gives us then that potassium. Watering and pruning time all have impacts with cold hardiness. So this is not meant to be read, but it's just taken off the web. Just shows cold hardiness ratings of common conifers. So we can look to see, okay, cold hardiness rating, 4 out of 5 for Pinus strobus. If we look at Pinus nigra, they're getting 2 out of 5. Limited hardiness, suffers in zone 3 or colder. Well, yeah, duh. We don't put an Austrian pine in zone 3 or colder anyway. But that's because it can't handle it, right? And so proper plant selection, right? Plant right place, right? Then fertilization, timing and type of fertilizer matters most. We want, so excessive late season nitrogen, we know is a bad thing, because that keeps the plant actively growing, we get that lush growth, which doesn't harden off, and we're going to have problems then in the winter, and then with deacclimation. Balanced or low nitrogen fertilizers, especially those with high potassium, that's what we want to be looking at, can enhance cell wall strength and improve that cold tolerance. Phosphorus supports root development, indirectly supporting better nutrient uptake and cold acclimation, so phosphorus is very important. So we really want to be careful of that nitrogen, especially late season applications. Best practice, obviously avoid nitrogen fertilization after midsummer. Use balanced potassium-rich formulations in late summer. Water, plants love water, right? It's what they do. But water availability is key. Making sure that they are not in a drought scenario before they go into that acclimation phase. So drought stress during the growing season reduces the vigor, doesn't have the ability for all of that accumulation to happen that the plant needs to go into winter. Excess water, so the opposite then of drought is obviously excess, but it may lead to root rot and reduced nutrient uptake, weakening also then cold tolerance as well. So having a wet fall can actually cause problems as well. Fall watering, especially before ground freeze, is critical. Moist soil holds heat better and reduces desiccation, injury during the winter. So best practice, provide consistent watering during the growing season and ensure the soil is moist going into winter. Pruning, we're changing the balance of the hormones within the plant. We're also affecting growth cycling and carbohydrate reserves. So, when we pull a plant part off, that carbohydrate amount is no longer there. And so having the correct timing is essential. So late season pruning may stimulate new growth. Again, we don't want to have that nice lush new growth because it's not going to harden off in time. And then that's where we're going to have damage to the plant. Mid to late winter pruning, while still dormant, is safer. It doesn't interfere with cold hardiness or push new growth. So a lot of times we're going to be doing that mid to late winter pruning. Heavy pruning, again, may reduce that carbohydrate reserves, weakening the plant's energy. So best practice, prune conifers during dormancy, late winter to early spring to minimize cold injury risk. So what is winter injury? Damage from freezing temperatures, desiccation or rapid temperature swings. Causes, we have abiotic, non-living, and then biotic living. So abiotic, rapid freeze-thaw cycles, which is becoming more common. Late spring frost, which also is very common. And midwinter warm spells, which again is becoming more common. Biotic factors, pathogen entry points from freeze damage, so we can have secondaries with these secondary infections. So symptoms of winter injury, browning of needles, especially in the southwestern exposures, dead buds, branch tips, cracking bark, trunk splits, delayed spring growth. Types of winter injury, which kind of match the symptoms as well. So we have types, but they're also symptoms. Desiccation, which is winter burn. Very common, obviously, in conifers to have winter burn, especially if you have strong winds. Freeze injury, frost cracks, sunscald, root injury. Hard to see root injury, right? That's one of the biggest problems. Late spring frost injury. Winter burn is the easiest. Very easy to see. And not always, unexpected, especially, when we have different environmental conditions. But it's when the leaves lose, obviously, more moisture than they can bring in. Common in evergreens because they retain needles year-round. Symptoms, browning or bleaching of needle tips, especially on the sun or wind-exposed side. Causes high winds, sunlight, also above snow line. We get that reflective light, but we also don't have the protection from the snow. That winter in 2019, at our research arboretum, all of our pine species got winter burn except for one, Pinus sembra. It's the only one that we didn't see winter burn. Wonderful plant. Freeze injury, extremely low temperatures, rapid temperature drops. A lot of the symptoms look the same. Now here, obviously, we're dealing with a broadleaf evergreen. So now a conifer, so I apologize. I'm putting a picture in here I shouldn't be showing. But it's when we have those rapid drops before full acclimation, which causes major problems. So we can have freeze injury in the fall, but we also have then freeze injury in the spring as well. But we end up with the same kind of symptoms: needle browning, shoot dieback, bud death, cracking bark, which then leads into the frost, cracks, and sun scald. A lot of conifers, especially early on, they don't have that thick bark. If they're limbed up, which hopefully they're not, but sometimes they do limb up. On our campus, everything's limbed up for safety. So, all of our Colorado spruce branches start usually about 6 to 8 feet up. They look horrible. And so we end up with a lot of cracking because of that. White pine, here's white pine with winter injury or southwest disease. Again, not too uncommon to see. Root injury, again, very hard. I didn't have a picture, I couldn't show you roots. But less cold hardy than the shoots. We know that there's different hardiness levels in different tissues. Roots are very susceptible to hardiness. That's why, like for us in North Dakota, and I think a lot of you realize you don't want to plant something in a raised bed if you don't have enough soil volume, because that could be a killer. So we can see wilting, poor spring growth, and then overall decline. So prevention and recovery. What can we do? Well, first, if we're on the forefront, proper plant location, selection, proper plants, but also have the proper planting location. Because like for us, we can grow a concolor fir, but I have to have it so it's protected from the winter sun. So I make sure I put it on a north side of the structure, and then they do okay, which is kind of counterintuitive because then they're going to be hit by our northwest primary winds. And so then I have to kind of protect them from that as well, from a different way. But if I guarantee if we have a concolor fir that hits any sunlight, they're toast. They could complete needle kill. Those needles will burn every time for us. So getting them on that north side, that winter sun can't hit them, and then they're pretty good. So proper species and provenance selection, proper fertilization, avoid that late summer nitrogen, focus on potassium. That's the one we really want to focus on. Watering, making sure that we're not over wet, but that we have consistent moisture within our soil. Proper mulching. Mulching is wonderful because that can help protect your roots. Right? It gives that extra blanket, but it also helps with the moisture retention as well. Windbreaks, so using other plant material to help your plant material. But it doesn't have to be plant material, but consider planting trees that can provide wind protection, especially for young trees. Pruning in spring, prune out dead or damaged branches. You can put on an anti-desiccant. Nurseries will do that. If needles are dead, but buds are alive, new foliage may regrow, so hopefully something will come back. And then obviously in severe cases, you're gonna have to replace what is lost. And then hopefully you can figure out a better type of species, better scenario. So in summary, cold hardiness is a complex adaptive trait. I wish it was just one simple light switch. We could say, hey, let's turn it on, let's turn it off, everything's great, everything's fine, but it's not. There's so many factors involved in cold hardiness. Injury results from both environmental extremes and plant responses. There's, again, a lot of factors that go into this. Genetic selection, site preparation, and cultural practices are key. So making sure we're doing what's best for the plant is essential to ensure that we're going to provide the best hardiness that we can. Selecting and preparing plants properly reduces injury risk. And then also having this ongoing research is so important. A lot of you are doing it yourselves, but then also at universities and nurseries as well is critical so we can have these climate-resistant or resilient conifers. Well, thank you for your time, because in the end, ultimately, we want happy trees, right? That's what we want. So thank you for your time. Thank you for having me. Again, this was a talk that was not meant, I think, for a keynote by any means. This was meant to be more of the Conifer College, so thank you. If you ever, again, are in North Dakota, please look me up. Here's my contact information. I'd love to show you our arboretum. I'd love to show you our conifer collection. Or if you just want to simply see the chipper, that's fine. So, oh, there we go. Perfect. All right, so thank you so much for your time. Any questions?
How are they producing the pines and spruce that you
How are they?
Are they grafted? Are they rooted?
Yeah, how are they producing the pines and the spruce that I talked about?
The hardiness?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So how does the production affect the hardiness? And I did not actually include that because that actually is a major factor and one that I'm worried about because they're all grafted, 100%, and so far for us, they've been okay. They use, depending on the species, they'll graft onto different things depending. Like Mugo, they typically are going to be grafting onto the Mugo. It just kind of depends on the species. Sembra, I don't think they go on Sembra.
We used to do them on white pine.
Yeah, and that's primarily.
I wondered if that would affect hardiness, because we always say when you graft a plant, you lose a zone.
Yes, the comment was when you graft a plant, you lose a zone, and I definitely agree with that. One of the issues that I looked at is like we have our own Korean maple selection, obviously not a conifer. And Isley was producing it, and actually Isley is now going to be reproducing it again, which is great. So Northern Spotlight, Korean maple, hardy down to -50. It's the only one that is that hardy that I know of, and they're actually hoping to use that in some of their crosses with palmatum. It's all grafted on palmatum, and I'm going, oh great! I have this plant that can survive -50, and now it's on Japanese rootstock, but surprisingly survives, and still zone 3 hardy. So it is, rootstock does have an impact, but sometimes not as much as you really do think. The birch, obviously, they're all produced through tissue cultures. They're on own roots. So, that's what's exciting. But that's one of the disadvantages and advantages we have with conifers is that we pretty much are stuck with grafting.
Do you give any consideration to the bacteria and mycorrhiza that's in the soil?
So do I give any consideration to the bacteria or the mycorrhizal in the soil? Not as much as I should. Because that is a major factor for uptake and for survivability, yeah. So that is something we need to be looking more at, and I know a lot of people are, because the mycorrhizal flora is extremely important, yes.
Could you please clarify the carbohydrate reserve or any energy reserve in the evergreen conifer? So, speaking of pruning, let's say, is the energy stored in bark, roots, wood,
So the
and
question is about carbohydrate storage. So
yes.
The plant can store carbohydrate in a lot of different locations. So, within the actual main tissues of the stems, in the roots, not really bark, but throughout the plant where it's going to be needed. So carbohydrate storage is extremely important, yes.
Okay, cool.
Is there any research that connects seed source for Picea pungens with needle cast?
So is there any research that focuses on Picea pungens sourced with needle casts?
So Oregon nurseries mostly get their seed source of Picea pungens from northern Arizona and New Mexico. And then they go to Oregon, and then they go to the Midwest.
Interesting. So the comment was made said that most of the seed source for Picea pungens is coming from Arizona?
Northern Arizona,
New Mexico, obviously going to Oregon for growth, for grafting, etc., and then coming into the Midwest. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know of anybody that actually is doing research on that. Like I said, needle cast research is really hard to do. It's one of the few fungus that we can't just grow a plant like in a controlled environment and inoculate. It doesn't work. So it's really hard to do it. And so we actually at NDSU had one of the top needle cast researchers, a tree pathologist, and he was kind of explaining the process to me, but he says, you really just have to line trees out in the area that get it and just wait and see.
So is it a climate change thing, or is it a secondary infection?
Is it a climate change thing or a secondary? That's maybe a little bit of both. That's a hard question to answer. Because obviously it's an environmental factor too, having the perfect environment for that pathogen to thrive. Obviously it has to be there as well.
Sure.
So there's a lot going into that, but I think we're gonna, I don't know how much of the climate
If the seed source is a dry climate,
right,
going into a wetter climate.
right, seed source going from dry to wet to moderate.
Right.
So what's it gonna do? Yeah, that's a good question. That's something I'm very interested in. That's why, like, when I was looking at this, our spruce, our Norway spruce that I'm positive is the finished spruce, is that, you know, is the higher level of needle cast resistance coming from the Siberian spruce? Nobody's ever tested that. So that's one thing we're actually looking at. I'm actually growing out a population of Siberian spruce so I can plant out a row and see if they show resistance. So I'll let you know in 10 years. Yeah, so anti-desiccants comment is having mixed results and actually not real good results. And I agree with you. I would not recommend the use of them in the landscape. You know, again, some people will use them in transport of the trees, especially if they're doing like a large tree spade. But it's better to make sure that everything's right in the forefront and not focus on that. You know, having the proper plant selection, having the proper nutrients, proper water. Yeah, I've not had good success. It's just something I just wanted to throw on the list, and I probably shouldn't have.
You talked at the beginning about how there was a gentleman that will retire.
Yes.
You took that graduate student, and are you going to be around in 10 years to retire then, or get that answer?
Yeah, so the question is, I mentioned all the retirements that are happening in woody improvement, and that is really bothering. It's a huge concern of mine because we're seeing a big shift away from woody plant improvement from academia, and not a lot of, I mean, there is still obviously happening at the nursery level. With this student, you know, his idea was that he's hoping that he could get his Ph.D. quick enough that he might be able to get one of these positions. We'll see. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but the bigger concern is that not only when these faculty are retiring, is that a lot of the universities, because it's long-term research, and what we deal with now is what's called impact funding. You know, you're funded for 2 years, and you have to have an impact. What impact did you have on the people? And when I'm doing long-term evaluations, my impact in 2 years is 0. And so it's really hard to fund long-term projects and do these type of things. And then also there's a huge shift now because, again, funding is difficult. And I didn't mention with my program, but we, like I said, we had 40 active trademarks. And that's essential because we get royalty money. And that royalty money comes back to the program, and that's what's really helping pay for the program. You know, I do grants, but it's all about royalty money. And that the university can't, well, I say they can't touch it, because they already take 70% at the beginning of it for overhead and everything. But that's what's so important. And we're seeing now also a shift in academia going to exclusive releases. So that, you know, trees are now not being shared, even though I feel that because I'm a land grant, if I release, you know, my Highland Splendor spruce, that's open source. Anybody can license with North Dakota State Research Foundation and grow it and sell it. But now we're getting to the point where academia is selecting so that it goes into first editions, or it goes into the Isleys of, you know, these single releases. And then, so if you buy from Isley, awesome, and I love Isley. I'm not gonna badmouth Isley at all, because they're one of the best. But it comes down to then is that an independent grower can actually then license it. And that's a big change in academia too. So it's scary. I don't know what's gonna happen in academia in the next 10 to 20 years. I was told so I started at NDSU 14 years ago, and it was 2 years after I was working there, they told me, wow, you know, did you realize that this position was gonna be eliminated and turned into a wheat breeding program? Like, good, glad it didn't. Any other last questions? I know I'm holding you guys up with whatever.
On the fall acquisition slide, you mentioned that plant cells are trying to reduce water that isolate. Isn't that in conflict with the
So the question is, in fall acclimation, the plants are moving water and having kind of less water, but that's in contradicting to what we're saying that they should have water so they can withstand. And it's moving is the osmotic potentials, so it's moving water into the cells and getting it out of those intercellular spaces, so the ice crystals don't form. And that's where we want to have water, but then the plant also does the accumulation of those brain fart. Antifreeze, yes, and having that within the cell. So it's both. It's definitely both. We want to make sure we have adequate water, but we want to make sure the plant is moving the water away from those membranes and those intercellular spaces. All right, I've bored you long enough with cold. Thank you again.